Hello, everybody. So today starts module 7 of 8. So we're getting very near the end of the semester. The last couple weeks, everything we've looked at so far has been in 2D. So I did want to take a look at some 3D stuff and look at what's different. And was looking at that in Unity. There's not really a whole lot of requirements. There's a tutorial to turn in. It's a video from the station called Brackies. It's one of my favorite places to look for YouTube for Unity tutorials. They're usually very, very thorough though, and it doesn't fit in. Their platformer one, I really like their platformer game, but it is 34 11 to 20 minute video. So it is very, 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 very thorough. Way too thorough for our time constraints. But the channel, the 3D tutorial is on. They did have a nice short 3D tutorial, just the basic introduction, so I use that. And that channel, you might want to take note of that because it's an actual company that all those people do is make games. They sit around 40 hours a week, full-time job, probably a lot more than 40 hours a week. And all they do is make games or make assets to sell on the Unity store and other related game stores like that. Both free and paid for assets. So those people, it's a company that all they do is sell games, and the guy that does it, the guy they put in front of the camera for the videos is just real high energy. He's excited about everything he does. It's like he gets super excited about pressing a couple buttons on the keyboard. It's a good one to have on the video. But they're very good. I like to go to them first. So take note of who that is for Unity reference. The tutorial itself should go really, really quickly. As a ball rolling across the ground, basically, left and right up. So we'll look at the 3D stuff and just kind of introduce it, because at this point in the semester, the real thing is just finishing up the projects. You spend most of your time doing that. Introduce this, and in the advanced class, SDEV 248, which we'll be running in the spring. I think most everybody will have met the required prerequisites for. There's one more prerequisite, I think, or co-requisite. You have to have the language class or be enrolled in the language class, which if you haven't registered yet, I am teaching Python SDEV 220 the first 8 weeks, which would be the language specific course to meet that co-requisite requirement for SDEV 248 the second 8 weeks. And pretty much everything I teach from now on is going to, unless it's strictly on asynchronous online, is going to be learning here. It would be like this. If you can make it to the campus, I'll be here. I live really close. When I came here as a student, my driver's license was suspended, so there were a number of times that I had to walk to campus, and it wasn't really that bad. It wasn't that big of a deal. So I live very, very close. I will be on campus if you want to join me on campus, or the Zoom call if that's more convenient, save a few bucks on gas. Like that. But those courses are running in the spring. I'm teaching Python, but IB Online and other places around the same learning format will have Java or C#. And that class is pretty much going to be all 3D games in Unity. We'll be using C# for the first week and a half or 2 weeks is just studying that language, or the syntax of that language, getting the basics of that down. So that's coming up. I guess the main note of that is remember to register sooner rather than later. Classes do get canceled for low enrollment. So if everybody waits till the last minute, it's going to look like nobody's taking the class. It happened with a PhD class for me in 2019. I was all excited to teach the class, ready to, and a bunch of people that said they were excited about taking it. And the week before classes started, there was only one person enrolled. One person's not enough for a class, right? We need a few more than that. So the class was dropped for low enrollment. And then that Saturday and Sunday before the semester started, both the dean and I got a number of emails, 5 or 6 emails each from different students asking where that class went because they wanted to register for it. And they tried to wait till the day before the semester started because the class had already been dropped for low enrollment. So you don't want that to happen. Register sooner rather than later. So the biggest thing in going from 2D to 3D games is the 2D is kind of like what we'd always draw it in math class. We have our x-axis and our y-axis, and then we use the points there, but really we'd use vectors. We talked about vectors a few times. So instead of just a point in space, we think about the arrow that leads to that point. That marker's no good. Try the other line. Generally think about it as the arrow that leads to that point, because we can move that arrow around, make it longer, shorter, and adjustments on that arrow, and it's not specifically locked to the thing in space. But an arrow does, we can kind of redraw that, think about it as a right triangle. Hey, we do still deal with X and Y components separately, or horizontal and vertical are separate, but we always take them together. So we weren't really working in 2 dimensions, we were working on one plane with a horizontal and vertical axis, combining those together. So when we step that up to 3 dimensions, I'll kind of just draw it like this. I'll put X, Y, and Z, the traditional way to put that in math class. When we step that up, we weren't working really in 2 dimensions, we were working on one plane. So it's not, we were 2 dimensions adding 1 more dimension. We're going from 1 plane into 3 planes. So we have our XY plane here, but we also have, I should use the blue for that. We also have this XZ plane, this surface over here, and the YZ plane, like this surface. So really we're going from 1 surface up to 3. So it's not 1/3 more, or it's not 50% more, it's 3 times as much. And that's really the only difference, is we're not adding 1 more axis. We need to think about how we were working on the entire plane. And working on a plane, when we add another axis, we're going to have 2 more planes to work with. Otherwise, a lot of stuff scales straight up. Our labels on the axes are arbitrary. I drew it in the math class way here. But in Blender, where we make our models, we have the z-axis going up, the x-axis going to the right, and the positive y-axis coming forward. But in Unity, we'll have the y-axis going up, the x-axis going to the right. I'll do that to keep that consistently. And then the z-axis going away from us. If you look at this for a second and think about rotating it so that y is upward, or rotate this so that z is upward so it matches that one. Oh, that is backwards. Positive x goes that way. If we rotate that so that z is upward and y is coming out, our positive x goes the other direction. So in one of them, it's like we move counterclockwise to get from the y to the x-axis. And on the other one, we move clockwise to get from the x to the y-axis, or y to the x-axis. So they are completely disoriented from each other as far as the labels go. So we do have to make little adjustments like that, because these are going to be the 2 most popular places to build your 3D models, and then the most popular place to use those models in a game. And there's a slight adjustment there. So that's what I wanted to start with. I'll erase that. The main point there is that the labels are arbitrary. We can label them whatever we want. And in a lot of situations, it's convenient to relabel them differently. I don't know if we'll get into any of those situations where we label things different, but if you have something that's like always tilted to the side, it's a lot more convenient to call it that direction up than the normal up, because otherwise you have to always make that adjustment over to whatever that angle it's leaning is. It's a lot easier just to change your label, and then that lean always becomes the local up. So it adds a little bit extra confusion, but really not much. So I want to start with that and look at Blender models, and instead of downloading things from the asset store, there's lots of them. I also want to minimize the clutter, right? And we're trying to look at things in detail. We don't need a whole lot of clutter on the screen, so we don't need super fancy animated things. So I have something here. This little Blender model. This was originally the model done in SDEV 148 last fall. I've added a few things on that using it in other lectures since then. There was only one animation when we did it in our class, but that was a bit much for the 1 day of 3D modeling like we did in our class. That's why we did a snowman. So the snowman would be a lot easier to do. Yeah, it was a bit much when I tried to do that in 1 day. I've been making models for too long and didn't realize how overwhelming that was going to be for everybody. So hopefully the snowman was less overwhelming. But last year we did this little dragon, and I've used it in a couple of examples since then. Notice the material is composed of different colors. To do that, I've used it in several different lectures. I went over here to this thing called like that, and go in edit mode. Under UV editing, you can sort of select your shape and then export all of those little vertexes, edges, and faces on a flat surface. So it doesn't look like a 3D model, but it can relate to it. There's different ways to project it. And then it's very time consuming. We go through one at a time, because notice the shapes change over here. Some of them are obvious, the ones that are the dragon's wings, but it's also kind of hard to tell what's the top wing and what's the bottom wing. We go through and figure out which one of these shapes is which face on the model or vertexes, and then you just open that 2D thing and something else and add the colors. So time consuming, but not super difficult. Get some variance in the material. And then this has a couple of animations. I only had one when we did it in class, but I've added a couple more here. There's a fly animation. We get that where the dragon's kind of flapping its wings. Not fancy animations. It was used as an example, so I still never even really finished the model. But it makes good classroom examples because we don't get lost in details. There's also an idle animation. Oh, why didn't I switch sides? Oh, armature. Now I can switch it to idle. Where the dragon's just kind of standing still, waving his head around, waiting to do something. And a walking animation where it's just kind of moving the legs forward. So not even fancy animation. It's not a finished model or anything. I'll send this to you all in just a moment. Once we get our animations there, Unity wants something, what's called an FBX file. Oh, when I'm talking about Blender, I should probably start the Unity project because that does take a while. I meant to do that right off the bat, so I'm going to go over here, go to Unity Hub, and make a quick new project. This time we just want the basic 3D one, and we'll give it some sort of name. First 3D exam. That sounds like a good name for it. Make sure you're using the right version of the engine. If you have multiple ones installed, and start that. And Unity wants what's called an FBX file. So if you go to export, so on your model, go to export and export the FBX file. And again, I'm going to send these out to you in a moment. Then you just want to choose different options. If you have a light and a camera, those are the two big ones. Unity has a light and a camera. So if you export them with your model, when you bring that model into Unity, you're going to have two cameras and two lights. We can ignore one of the cameras, but we'll have twice as much light as we should, and the light might be at a different angle than the one in Unity, so the lighting gets way off. So usually, you can see over here, I went ahead and made sure there's nothing in this project but the model. But you can also unselect it here. A few other ones, to go to Unity, make sure Y is up and -Z is forward, which those should be the defaults on an FBX export, but just it's always good to confirm. Make sure everything's local scale with the Z, -Z is the new forward, and positive Y is the upward. So that's what Unity wants. And you can look at the other options, but the big one is make sure you select bake animation, and then that will include the animations with your model. Probably, yeah, we have to have those animations, the riggings and the armature and all that we saw. So make sure the right elements are selected, the right change of coordinates. I think I was drawing on the board a moment ago. We were going from a counterclockwise rotation in Blender to a clockwise rotation in Unity. And we're switching which direction is up altogether. And then make sure you bake all the animations in, which basically usually just select everything and just make sure all the checkboxes are selected, then export that. And I'm going to send you these examples here in just a moment. Let's see if Unity opened up. Okay, so Unity opened up. So one thing I'm going to do is I created that export, the FBX. That's what Unity wants, but I'm also just going to grab the Blender file and drag that whole Blender file right over. So I'm grabbing not the export, not that export I just made a big deal about. I'm going to grab the Blender file and drag that right over. And it takes a second, but Blender is popular enough that Unity will go ahead and work with the Blender file directly. So let's see, brought in that dragon object. There's an armature, a cube, and one animation, but we had 3 animations. That's the problem with the dragging the thing over. It will only bring over one animation at a time. If you have more than one animation, like our dragon here with walking, idling, and flying, then it has to be done with an FBX file. But a lot of your models aren't going to be animated. Like a rowboat's not animated, but your character might spend a lot of time sitting in a rowboat or a canoe. So that you can just drag the Blender file over and bypass the export thing altogether. Otherwise, you can right click and import new asset and just browse to it, or drag and drop it. Whoops. Delete folder and then that FBX one. So you see, we got the same thing. We got that armature data, the skeleton for it. We have the mesh, which I probably should have renamed that at some point. It still says cube, but it's definitely not a cube shape anymore. Material, we'll talk about that in a second, but this way we got 3 animations. And we'll look at some other stuff. Well, a couple other things when we get over to it. So I will send that in just a second. I'm going to create a quick background and I'll send that out as well. So for quick working images, just getting started, or I usually do all the models in Blender. Blender has much better editing functionality than Unity. Unity editing the models is very restricted. I need to make that message go away. There we go. I forgot to turn Teams notifications off. If anything from Teams pops up, please ignore that. There might be some restricted information there. Whoops, I should turn that off before class because it takes forever to turn off the notifications from Teams. Microsoft just does not believe that you don't want to receive notifications from Teams. So I'm going here and get rid of this stuff. We solved things on Blender. I'll just kind of hit W a couple times, switch selection model, and get rid of all this stuff because I don't need any of that. And then add a cube. I guess I could have just not deleted that original cube. Which, if we grab the ruler and take a measurement, that's a rough measurement, but the cube is 2 by 2 by 2. It goes out one unit each direction from the origin. So it's twice as big as it needs to be. So to keep scale straight, I always scale it down by half, and then it starts as a 1 by 1 by 1 cube because that makes a lot more sense in my mind. Then if we want something 3 meters, we just make it 3 times bigger than that. Then if you push Control A, the cube selected, push Control A, and you can reset that 50% that 50% scale is now the 100%. Control A and reset it. And then we can stretch this out to a normal size. So maybe 80 by 80. Sounds like a good game size. Let's do 1 meter. Yeah. Set to meters right now. You can set millimeters, inches, any unit of measurement. 80 by 80 sounds like it'll be good for today. And now we have this big surface we could turn into something big bigger than that. Let's do 120. 120 by 120. And if we go with it selected, if we go to edit mode, all we have is the corners. That's not really enough to do anything. So right click on it and you can subdivide that into a lot of parts, and on the little menu down here, add a whole bunch of cuts. What's it look like from there? 25. Any more than that? 50. There we go. Now there's a whole bunch of little surfaces to work with. Probably go even smaller. It's 120, so maybe I'll just do I'll do 120. There we go. So now there's a whole bunch of vertexes on there to work with. And first thing I like, at least for test ones, temporary working ones, I'll kind of look straight on and use that freeform selection again, hit W a couple times, and then just grab some random areas to start making bigger. So I'll select all those, and then looking at the side, I'll drag those up just a little. And back to the top. And maybe make a slightly different selection. And again, drag that up just a little. And get different levels in the terrain. There's something over here, or at the top of the hill. And then something over here. Just a slightly elevated area. Which gives us a rough topology for the character to work around. That way we're not walking around a flat plane because our game's probably not going to be a flat plane. We can add different things in there over time. We already looked at Unity, so doing the quick steps here. What I usually like to do after that is do that really quick and then switch over to sculpt mode, where it's like we're working in clay, and then use the clay molding tools to smooth that out so it looks like an actual surface. Makes a nice quick way to do that. So if we, I guess look from the side again. The third button down adds clay, so we have something to work with. So I just kind of drag that around randomly and add little bits of clay so that there's like smoother areas. We turn it a couple different angles. And technically it's not random, but sort of adding some randomness to all that stuff that original change in area. Then maybe just a smooth thing. I said smooth, grab a smooth one and just smooth out a bunch of those bumps. So there's no like jagged edge for our character to get caught on. That'll be a nice quick surface. And hit that from a couple different angles. Since it's supposed to be like a terrain, a world to walk around, but maybe not smooth everything out. Because we do have sharp cliffs and things that we can't walk over in terrains. And just like your model, you would want to spend a lot of time with that. Blender is capable of doing GIS status. You can download that right from Google Earth. If it's on Earth, a city, natural landscape, Google has it in 3D model form already. You can just download it, put a little section in Blender. It does not download any colors from Google Earth. They do not share their colors, but they will share the model. So then you just add materials to make it, get some colors in it, clean it up, maybe add a few buildings to a city, take away a few buildings, things like that. So that's another really quick way to do stuff. That'll work. I'll just add a material here and send this out to you so we have something to work with. We saw this before. And I guess a quick review on Blender. Right? We have all those vertexes, a bunch of dots in space. Those are connected by edges. And whenever we fill in, there's enough edges to fill in a polygon, then we have a face. And we have lots and lots of those. So we just move the vertex to the spot we want them. And a color isn't quite enough. We have to actually set up a material. Make it sort of brownish. Yeah, that'll work. He was already here. He must have got the zoom colors. So I just choose a brown one. That way it'll look like a desert or something. Then we go back to object mode. These buttons up here are the different ways we can view it. So we can view just the wireframe, just that mesh itself, all the vertexes and edges. Faces are transparent in the wireframe. Or we can see what the faces look like, or apply the material, or fully render it, but we don't have any light here, so all we see is a big dark thing. You can't render any light. And all I clicked on was the color. We have all these other options for the material. Like, is it metallic, is it reflective and shiny? Specular is how reflective is it? How rough is smooth is the surface? Is there a clear coat on it? And we have to do all the things with the material and how the light will reflect off that material, not just the color. But for our purposes, the color is probably enough here. So I'll go ahead and save that. I made it brown, so I'm going to call it desert. When I get zoom something else out of the way. There we go. Nice little desert for our dragon to walk around in. And then we can look at some of the basic concepts like we saw in 2D, move it over to 3D and see how that applies. And I will export that, again, export the FBX file. Actually, there's no animation here at all, right? So this is the case where we would not need to export that because our background, our world is not animated. All the stuff in the world might be. So instead of exporting that, I'll drag that right into Unity as soon as I send it to you. Let's see. New folder. Examples. And all of those. Copy. Paste. And put it in a zip file. Oh, did y'all see the announcement tomorrow? I'm not gonna be in my office hours at 11. I should be there by 4:30. I plan to be in, actually, I'll probably be in around 1 o'clock or something, but figured I'd cancel the whole 11 to 1:30 since it might be after 1:30. Which class are we? This one. Announcement. Example. That's example. I'll just put that as the title. Here are the those three. Example. All right, those 3D model files should be in your email now. Just download and unzip that folder. Just right click and extract, or if you've moved to Windows 11 yet, extraction is automatic. You can just go ahead and navigate in there. On Windows 10, you could click in the folder and go in and look at the files, but you still can't do anything with them. On Windows 11, if you start doing that, you can just, it'll automatically extract them. So that gives us a couple models to work with. I'm going to delete that one I brought in earlier, and that way we'll go through the steps again after you all have had a couple seconds to download it for those who are following along. And it takes a couple seconds to get files downloaded sometimes. And well, I guess while you're downloading the files, I'll point out a lot of this looks the same. We have all those. We can set up the panels any way we want. In the middle, we still have our hierarchy, the scene, the game preview, the inspector panel, the console, sort of the default layout. In the hierarchy, you'll notice something different. When we were doing 2D games, it started off with just a main camera. But now we also have a light source. Because it's 3D, so we're going to have shadows, things coming in. You can see if I click on that, where the light is most directed at. And then we have ambient light spreading off from that. You can see what our camera's pointed at. And notice we do have to worry about the 3-dimension every time. You'll definitely want a regular mouse for 3D stuff because the middle button makes a big difference. The scroll, the wheel zooms in and out. I should switch to this one so we can see it. And clicking the wheel does panning. Left click is going to be select, and right click rotates your view. So right click to rotate your view around, look at it from a different angle. Middle click to pan, which is kind of the opposite of what Blender had. And scrolling is still zooming. That's pretty standard everywhere. All right, hopefully you've got those files downloaded, so I'll go drag those in. The delete folder. So the desert's not animated. We don't need to worry about extra animations, so I'm just gonna drag that right over. And when you do that, notice it's taking a second. What it's doing is it automatically turns that into an FBX file. Blender is so common that they just went ahead and put in Unity how to recognize a Blender file and convert it to an FBX automatically. Our dragon had 3 animations, so for that, we'll need the FBX file. So that .fbx, which is just one of many formats we have for 3-dimensional models. The big difference we'll get those, the reason you might still want to export non-animated things is, remember, we were able to rotate our axes. So if I just drag the dragon in, he's oriented correctly for Unity now. The y-axis is up. The z-axis is forward. And when you export it, make sure you say negative z is forward. But when it gets over here, positive z is actually forward. Differences in the labeling of the software. But if I drag the world in, notice our axes are different. It shows the z-axis pointing up, and it's still showing the Unity, or sorry, the Blender axes. Oh, they're back to materials. It brought in the material from Blender. They keep alternating back and forth on this. It's just a Boolean in the source code that says include materials when you do the import. And it's not hard to go into the source code and find a Boolean. It's nicely named. It's actually spelled out include _ materials. So a lot of people are just gonna make it true when they try to stop people from importing materials. So every 2 or 3 versions, they go back to allowing materials. Usually they prefer you not to import the materials, just the model, because it's a different rendering pipeline. On that dragon, if I drag that in, see, it's still gray. None of the materials came in with it. There is a material here, but all that imagery and stuff is gone. It's a different rendering pipeline, and Unity they have different purposes. Blender has a better rendering pipeline overall. Blender can do the full-blown Hollywood quality, full-out realism, where you can trick people into whether or not it's a real picture or a model. Unity can come pretty close, but it can't quite match what Blender has. So that's why they like to set that Boolean to false, because it can't quite match that high quality that Blender exports. But we do have a rendering pipeline here. So on the dragon, if I select that, actually expand it, you'll see all the different components it's made of. We have all the stuff from the armature and then the cube itself. And there's sort of this default material that's in there. What we really need to do is give it a new material. Do that here. Yeah, I guess we have to do that here. So I'm going to create in the assets, right click and create a new material. And just make it separate from the thing. So I'll call it dragon skin. And then we have controls similar to what we had in Blender. The ones in Unity aren't quite as good as Blender. That's the big problem. Blender can do the photorealism, and Unity can't quite get there. So when people spend a lot of time in Blender, then it messes things up. Unity has a lot of different options, but they focused on lots of different options instead of one single pathway. like Blender. So their work is spread out more. You can choose different ones. I'm just gonna choose standard and give it like some sort of color, make it green. That sounds like a good color for a dragon. Select it and then zoom in on it. It's still separate from our thing though. So if we take the cube and then drag this over to the inspector, that will apply that material. I'll click on this. We have lots of different options, so we can make it metallic so that it's like more reflective. Turn the smoothness way down, so it's a little bumpy. Lots of different options. Normal map and height map, we would need some extra images to use. Normal is the direction straight out from every one of our faces on that polygon. Every one of those faces filling in the area between the vertexes and edges is at kind of a different angle. So normal is what normal means straight out. What is straight out? What is directly perpendicular to our surface? And we can use another picture to define what that is. So like a brick wall or different things, or height maps. Once we have normal, what normal is defined, we can use another picture to set things at different heights. So that's where you get things like a brick, take a picture of a brick wall and load that in. You don't need any of the colors or anything from the actual picture, but that picture, the different colors in that picture would define different heights and shadows would fall differently. That's getting into some offset stuff. You can see we have lots of controls over that, and there are lots of different categories where we get different controls over the material. I'm just going to stick with green for right now. So we have a green dragon and sort of this world underneath to look at. It's not a modeling class, so just quickly reviewing some of that stuff. Probably spend a little bit more time on those materials because it looks awful shiny there. Looks very plasticky, which might be good in some games, right? Maybe you want your games to look like action figures, like a bunch of G.I. Joes and Barbies running around the game. And that would be a good appearance for that. But every game's unique. So I'm going to go back to the dragon object and maybe choose a good starting point. So I usually just keep the move tool selected. So we have these nice little handles to grab and things. And just like we did on the 2D stuff, we saw it a couple times with platformers. I'll just kind of set our dragon at a starting point right somewhere in the middle. When I look at the camera, it looks like we're way off. The camera's looking at the bottom of our world and stuff. So there's just more adjustments getting everything in place. Where is the camera? Camera's at 0 on the X, 1 on the Y, and -10 on the Z. Maybe it needs to be higher. That's too much. Looking at the little preview here, I think I'm looking the completely wrong way to see the dragon. So I'm just going to spin that around. I'll use the rotation, and rotation is the angle around. So for this box, we will just give an angle number. And we want to spin around that vertical axis. Yaw is the term for that, if you know that one. Yaw, pitch, and roll. Yaw spins around the vertical axis. Pitch spins around the horizontal sideways. And, sorry, the other way. Roll spins around the horizontal sideways. No, that would be pitch. pitch spins around the horizontal sideways, and roll spins around the horizontal forward and backward. A lot of things use those proper terms. Unity did not use those proper terms. But you might want to get familiar with what yaw, pitch, and roll for 3D stuff. If we spin 180 degrees, oh, whoops, that's Z. 180 degrees around the y-axis. There we go. Now we're looking at our dragon. And if I look from over top, I can probably move that back a little ways. That'll work. Just for today, we're probably going to end up just moving around a little in front of the camera. There's a nice center machine thing we might look at today, but I'm thinking that's probably going to be Wednesday. One of those pre-built cameras we can use, and then that will follow the character around. Today, I just want to do some basic parts and leave lots of time to click around and do things. Click around in Blender, make some simple models, and bring those in. Or if you have some different models, try applying some of the things we've already seen in 2 dimensions to the 3-dimensional case. Or in general, the reason lecture time this week is going to be short, there's lots of things to finish up before the end of the semester. So there's going to be a lot of lab time. I don't want the lecture to go too long. But all of that should look somewhat familiar. Did you have a question? I did skip over the empty objects. So I did skip that separation of logic, and that same concept would still apply. It wouldn't be hard to do that, I guess, but that's always a better idea, to keep your logic separate from your graphics. But I'll just kind of skip that before for today. We saw that a few times. Let's just right click and create an empty object first, and then make all your graphics a child of that. But I already skipped it and make a bunch of adjustments. So now if we at least run this, we should be able to see the dragon standing there. Nothing really happening, nothing too fancy. We haven't really done anything but load our models in, but we can do similar things. We move that just a little bit higher. On the dragon, we can add a component like a rigid body component, so that the laws of physics apply to it. And this time it's going to be the regular rigid body. So all the 2D stuff has 2 specifically in it. And if there's no 2 there, then that means it's the 3D version. So I'll apply that. Here, gravity is just a checkbox. So now gravity should take over. We have the laws of physics. We also need a collider. We can do a box collider. And just kind of fill out a cube. But notice how we calculate, whoops. Dragon, edit the box collider. We have a lot more adjustments to get that box collider in place. We have to keep looking at different angles. And that's the thing I was talking about earlier. We have multiple planes we have to work in at once. That's not our only option for colliders. This one. Dragon here. There it is. Bring that in a little bit closer. Probably don't need all the wings and stuff. That's way too long. Side, there we go. Those are closer, and yeah, that's a good example of just setting up that box. In 2D, box was really, really quick because all we had was the width and the height. But now we have the width and the height, and we might be looking at it from an angle that kind of throws our perception off. and want to keep going back and forth and adjust that. There's different types of colliders in order for the dragon. Well, that's enough for the laws of physics. Now it should start falling, but we probably also want it to stop falling when it hits the ground. And that's going to be the same as what we saw in 2D. At least one of the objects involved in the collision has to have the laws of physics applied, and both objects need to have a collider, some sort of boundary defined. So on that, we could select the world, and the world doesn't need the laws of physics. We just need a collider. We could put a box collider, but there's other options. We could put a capsule, which is sort of a pill shape. It's like a cylinder that's rounded off at the ends. Those are pretty good for like characters. A human shaped character, the cylinder is going to have stuff way too wide at top, so we could round that off at the top. And really, where the step in a particular frame of the animation is, we usually don't care if the foot goes a little bit outside of our collider on each frame, if it's like the forward and backward. The main part of the human shaped character we worry about is the torso. Capsules are good for that. We also have spheres, nice evenly. This one for terrain, if you have a big complicated terrain, the mesh collider can be kind of nice. Actually, we could use a mesh collider on everything, but it shouldn't take you very long to realize that a mesh collider is going to use a lot more memory than just a box or a sphere. If we actually map out every vertex on that shape and use that as our collider, that's going to bog down RAM pretty quick. So you want to try to minimize those, but it does exist. And it just perfectly matches the mesh that we fed in there. So it perfectly matches your model, but much more resource intensive. Now we got the same thing that we saw in 2 dimensions. Our dragon, the laws of physics apply, and gravity pulls him down, but we define that surface to be solid, so when he hits, he stays once he hits that thing. I guess next up would be movement like we saw, which would kind of make this a good pause point, right? Pat will do this is a reasonable time to take a break. 10 minutes sound good to everybody? I see big head nods here, and then afterwards we'll do like we did in 2D. We'll throw in a script and make that dragon move around. And it'll probably be Wednesday before the camera follows in, so we'll move around in front of the camera. That makes it a good pause point here. So my laptop says 156. We will get back to it at 2:06. I'll see y'all in just a moment.